The day Zyra arrived was etched into Dren's memory not because of a significant event or spectacle, but due to how surreal it felt. He had signed up for the Interstellar domestic program on a whim, expecting nothing more than a bit of assistance around the house. Living alone in a tranquil stretch of countryside had its advantages, but the chores accumulated faster than he could handle. When he received the notification that his application had been approved, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. The pod landed in the middle of his yard at exactly 9 o'clock a.m. A smooth metallic craft, it glimmered in the sunlight so brightly that he had to shield his eyes. From within, a tall figure emerged. Zyra. She was unlike anything Dren had ever encountered. Her skin shimmered in a spectrum of colors, subtly shifting with each movement. Her large violet eyes held a penetrating curiosity, as if she were meticulously analyzing the world around her. "Greetings, Dren," she said, her voice melodic and calm, though it carried an undertone of authority. "I am Zyra, assigned to assist you. I trust you are prepared for my arrival?" He stood there momentarily stunned. Yes, of course. Welcome." He gestured toward the house, trying to mask his nervousness with a smile. "Come on in." Zyra tilted her head slightly, a gesture that felt oddly contemplative, and followed him inside. As she moved, her form was fluid yet precise, every step deliberate. Once inside, she set her belongings down, a sleek crate that hummed faintly. She began inspecting the space. "Your domicile is charming," she remarked, her tone neutral. "Charming? I guess that's one way to describe it," Dren replied, scratching the back of his neck. His house wasn't much to look at, simple, functional, with a lived-in warmth. "So, how does this work? Do you need instructions, or?" Zyra turned to him, her violet eyes narrowing slightly. "My purpose is to enhance your efficiency and comfort. I will observe your habits and adapt accordingly. However, should you have specific preferences, I am capable of accommodating them." Her matter-of-fact tone put him at ease, and over the next few days, Zyra quickly became an integral part of his life. She approached every task with an almost mechanical precision, from preparing meals that balanced nutrition and taste, to organizing his cluttered shelves in a way that made sense. For the first time in years, it was impressive, if a little unsettling. She rarely spoke unless necessary, and her movements were so quiet that Dren often forgot she was there. But as time passed, he began to notice subtle changes. Zyra's curiosity about human behavior grew. She started asking questions, simple ones at first, about why he preferred certain foods, or why he spent time watching television. Then the questions became more personal. "Why do humans form emotional bonds so easily?" she asked one evening as they sat in the living room. She was perched on the edge of the couch, her posture impeccable, while Dren slouched in his usual spot. I guess it's just how we're wired," he said, caught off guard. "Relationships make us feel connected. Safe." "Interesting," she murmured, her gaze fixed on him. And these connections often lead to reproduction?" Dren nearly choked on his drink. "Well, not always. I mean, sometimes, but it's not just about that." Zyra tilted her head again, her eyes narrowing slightly. "In my culture, reproduction is considered a logical step for maintaining genetic diversity. Emotional factors are secondary." He wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he just nodded and took another sip of his drink. Zyra's questions continued, each one probing deeper into the intricacies of human relationships. At first, he found it amusing, but as the days passed, her curiosity took on a more pointed focus. She seemed particularly fascinated by the concept of intimacy, often referencing the romance shows she had started watching in her free time. One night, Dren walked into the living room to find Zyra glued to the screen, her normally stoic expression replaced with something resembling awe. On the screen, a couple was locked in a dramatic embrace, confessing their undying love amidst a storm of tears and rain. "Is this an accurate depiction of human bonding rituals?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the screen. "Not exactly," he replied, suppressing a laugh. "It's exaggerated. Real relationships are a lot more complicated." "Complicated? How?" Well, for starters, people usually get to know each other before jumping into something like that. There's trust, communication, a whole process. Zaira nodded thoughtfully, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. Fascinating. I will continue to observe. Dren shrugged it off, chalking her fascination up to cultural differences. But one night, everything changed. He had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of work. The last thing he expected was to wake up to the sensation of something pressing down on him. Groggy and disoriented, he blinked a few times before his vision cleared. His heart nearly stopped. Zaira was straddling him, her iridescent skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Zaira, what are you doing?" he exclaimed, his voice cracking with panic. She looked down at him, her expression calm but focused. "I have been observing human behaviors, and I wish to explore the concept of breeding." Dren's mind raced as he tried to process her words. "Breeding? Zaira, that's not... You can't just do that." Her head tilted slightly, her violet eyes narrowing. "Is this not a standard human practice? I have observed numerous examples of physical connection in your media." "That's different," he stammered. "People don't just jump into it like that. There's context, consent, a whole process." Zaira leaned back slightly, her gaze thoughtful. "Fascinating. So humans require a sequence of rituals before engaging in reproduction?" "Yes," Dren said, nodding vigorously. "Exactly. It's about trust and mutual agreement." There was a long pause before Zaira climbed off him, her movements graceful as ever. "I see. My apologies, Dren. I misunderstood your customs." She left the room without another word, leaving him lying there, heart pounding and mind spinning. For the rest of the night, he stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The memory of her weight on him, the calm determination in her voice. It was all too much. The next day, Zaira was unusually quiet. She went about her tasks with her usual efficiency, but she avoided eye contact and spoke only when necessary. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy, and Dren couldn't shake the feeling that he had hurt her feelings, though he wasn't sure how. By the time evening rolled around, he couldn't take it anymore. He found her in the garden, tending to the flowers she had planted shortly after arriving. The sight of her kneeling among the blooms, her shimmering skin catching the last rays of sunlight, made his chest ache with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Zaira," he said softly, approaching her. "Can we talk?" She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "Of course." Dren hesitated, searching for the right words. "About last night. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wasn't expecting it. I overstepped. I apologize. I misinterpreted your customs," she said, her voice softer than usual. "It's okay," he replied quickly. "You're just curious. And that's not a bad thing. But humans, we like to take things slow. It's about more than just the act. It's about connection." She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the flowers. "This day. In my culture, physical connection often precedes emotional bonding. It is efficient." "Maybe," Dren said with a small smile. "But humans enjoy the journey as much as the destination." For the first time since she arrived, Zaira smiled. A small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. But it was enough to make his heart skip a beat. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together in the garden, their conversation flowing like a quiet stream, building a bridge between two worlds. The days following their conversation felt different. The air between Dren and Zaira seemed lighter, as though an unspoken barrier had been lifted. Zaira no longer hesitated to ask questions, though she approached the topic of human intimacy with a newfound sensitivity. Dren, in turn, made an effort to share more about himself and the intricacies of human relationships. It was an odd kind of dance, two individuals from vastly different worlds learning to navigate the delicate threads that connected them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Zaira turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Dren, may I ask you something personal?" "Mictor." "Sure," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What's on your mind?" "Mictor, you mentioned before that humans value connection." He lied. "Have you experienced such a bond before?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah," he said finally. "A long time ago." Zaira's violet eyes seemed to soften. "What happened?" Dren let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. Life happened. We wanted different things, I guess. She wanted to travel the world, and I wanted something quieter. We couldn't make it work. Zaira tilted her head, her curiosity evident. Did you feel sadness when the bond ended? Evident stap. Yeah, he admitted. It hurt a lot, but I guess that's part of being human. You take the good with the bad. She nodded slowly, as though filing the information away. In my culture, partnerships are often dissolved when they no longer serve a purpose. Emotional pain is considered inefficient. Dren couldn't help but smile at her clinical phrasing. Maybe, but sometimes the pain is worth it. It means you cared about someone. It's what makes the good times so meaningful. Zaira seemed to consider this, her gaze distant. Fascinating. I wonder if such a connection is possible between individuals from different species. The question hung in the air, heavier than Dren expected. He shifted in his seat, unsure how to respond. I guess anything's possible, he said carefully. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he thought he saw something deeper flicker within them. Something warm and unfamiliar. But before he could dwell on it, Zaira stood abruptly. I should prepare dinner, she said, her tone reverting to its usual calmness. Dren watched her retreat into the house, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. He couldn't deny the growing bond between them, but the implications of it made his head spin. Could something like this even work? Was he reading too much into her behavior, or was he just projecting his own feelings onto her? Over the next few weeks, their interactions took on a strange rhythm. Zaira continued her duties with her usual precision, but there was a new layer of warmth to her actions. She started experimenting with human cuisine, even asking Dren for his favorite dishes. She joined him during his evening walks, her questions about human culture becoming more thoughtful and personal. One night, as they sat by the fireplace, Zaira surprised him by pulling out a small device from her belongings. It was a sleek, oval-shaped object that emitted a soft glow. What's that? Dren asked, leaning forward. It is a memory capsule, she explained. It contains fragments of my experiences on Tolar. Would you like to see? Dren hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, sure. Zaira placed the capsule on the table between them and activated it. A holographic projection sprang to life, filling the room with images of an alien world. Towering crystalline structures sparkled under twin suns, their surfaces alive with shifting colors. Strange, elegant creatures moved gracefully through lush, otherworldly landscapes. It was breathtaking. This is my home, Zaira said softly, her voice tinged with something that sounded almost like longing. I have not returned in many cycles. Why not? Dren asked, unable to tear his eyes away from the images. The Terran society values efficiency above all else, she said. I was deemed unconventional. My curiosity about other species was seen as a distraction. Dren frowned. That's why you joined the Interstellar Domestic Program? She nodded. It was a way to explore, without violating our cultural norms. But I often wonder if I made the right choice. Dren's chest tightened at the vulnerability in her voice. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad you're here. Zaira turned to him, her violet eyes searching his face. As am I, Dren and Heron. The moment stretched between them, charged with an intensity that neither seemed willing to break. Finally, Zaira reached out and placed a hand on his. Her touch was cool but sent a wave of warmth coursing through him. Dren, she said softly, I believe I am beginning to understand your concept of connection. His heart pounded as he met her gaze. Yeah, she nodded. It is disorienting but not unpleasant. He laughed, a nervous, breathless sound. That's one way to put it. Zaira tilted her head, a small smile playing at her lips. Perhaps humans and Terran are not so different after all. As the fire crackled softly in the background, they sat there, hand in hand, two beings from different worlds finding solace in each other's presence. And for the first time in years, Dren felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The weeks that followed felt surreal to Dren. Zaira had become more than just a presence in his home. She was a part of his life now in ways he hadn't anticipated. Their connection grew with every shared moment, every story exchanged by the fire, and every accidental touch that lingered just a little too long. Dren found himself looking forward to her voice in the morning, her precise movements as she prepared meals, and her curious questions about the human world. She was a mystery that he couldn't help but unravel piece by piece, and each discovery left him wanting more. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, Dren sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Zaira stood by the window, her eyes following the raindrops that trickled down the glass. "You don't have rain on Tawar?" he asked, breaking the silence. She shook her head, her gaze never leaving the window. "We have precipitation, but it is not like this. Rain on Earth feels alive, as though the sky itself weeps and rejoices." Dren chuckled. "That's a poetic way to put it." Zaira turned to him, a small smile curving her lips. "Perhaps your human ways are influencing me." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that a bad thing?" Not at all." The warmth in her tone sent a strange flutter through his chest. He took a sip of his coffee, trying to steady himself. "You're full of surprises, you know that." "So are you," she said, her voice softer now. "You are unlike any human I have encountered." Dren set his mug down, studying her. "In a good way, I hope?" She stepped closer, her violet eyes locking onto his. "In the best way." The room seemed to shrink around them as the intensity of her gaze held him captive. He felt his breath hitch, his pulse quicken. For a moment, he thought she might step back, retreat into the polite distance she often maintained. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out her hand, brushing against his. "Dren," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there is something I must tell you." His heart pounded. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly on his. "The Terran are not accustomed to uncertainty. But since arriving here, I have experienced emotions I cannot fully comprehend." Emotions that seemed to defy logic. Dren swallowed hard. "Zaira, are you saying?" She nodded slowly, her eyes searching his. "I believe I feel something for you. Something I have never felt before." The words hung in the air, electrifying and terrifying all at once. Dren stared at her, his mind racing. He had suspected, hoped that she might feel the same pull he did, but hearing her say it out loud was something else entirely. He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I think I feel the same way." A look of relief washed over her face, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That pleases me," she said, a hint of her usual formality creeping back into her tone. Dren couldn't help but laugh, the tension in the room breaking. "You really know how to keep a guy on his toes." She tilted her head, clearly confused by the expression. "On his toes?" "It means you're unpredictable," he explained, but in a good way. Her smile returned, brighter this time. "I will take that as a compliment." They spent the rest of the evening talking, their words flowing easily as the storm raged outside. For the first time, there were no barriers between them, no unspoken questions or hidden doubts. They were simply two souls finding comfort in each other's company. But as the days passed, the reality of their situation began to creep in. Zaira's presence on Earth was not permanent, and Dren knew that the interstellar domestic program would eventually call her back to Tabor. The thought of losing her filled him with a dread he hadn't felt in years. One night, as they sat by the fire, he broached the subject. "Zaira, what happens when your contract here ends?" Her expression grew somber, and she looked down at her hands. "I will be summoned back to Tuar. It is the way of the program." Dren frowned. "And you don't have a choice?" She hesitated before shaking her head. "Now. Not unless there is a compelling reason for me to stay." His mind raced. "What kind of reason?" Zaira met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. "The Terran place great importance on partnerships that serve mutual benefit. If I were to form such a bond here, it might be considered justification for remaining." Dren's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying?" She nodded, her cheeks tinged with a faint lavender hue. "If we were to formalize our connection, it could allow me to stay." The weight of her words settled heavily on him. He knew what she was asking, and the implications of it were staggering. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that the thought of a life without her was unbearable. "I need some time to think about this," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Zaira nodded, her expression understanding. Of course, take all the time you need. But time, as Dren soon discovered, was a luxury he didn't have. A week later, a sleek silver craft appeared in the sky above his property. It was the Terran, an envoy sent to retrieve Zyra. As she prepared to leave, Dren felt a knot of panic tightening in his chest. He couldn't let her go, not without telling her how he truly felt. "Zyra," he said, catching her arm as she stood at the base of the craft's ramp. "Wait." She turned to him, her expression calm but her eyes betraying a hint of sadness. "Dren, I don't want you to go," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't imagine my life without you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked as though she might cry. But she quickly composed herself, her voice steady. "Then what do you propose?" Dren took a deep breath, his decision made. "Stay with me, not because of some contract or rule, but because you want to. We'll figure everything else out together." Zyra stared at him, her expression unreadable, and then slowly she stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek. "You are an extraordinary human, Dren," she said softly, "and I will be honored to stay by your side." As the craft departed without her, leaving them alone once more, Dren felt a wave of relief and happiness wash over him. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt certain they could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. As the months passed, Dren and Zyra fell into a rhythm that felt natural, as though their lives had always been intertwined. They transformed the small farm into a sanctuary, a blend of human warmth and Terran efficiency. The bond between them deepened with each passing day, their differences becoming strengths rather than barriers. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Dren and Zyra sat on the porch. The soft chirping of crickets filled the air, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. Zyra broke the comfortable silence, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder how two beings from such different worlds ended up here together?" Dren smiled, his hand reaching out to take hers. "All the time. But I've stopped questioning it. Some things don't need an explanation. They just are." She tilted her head, her violet eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Humans have a way of simplifying complexities. It's one of your most endearing traits," Dren chuckled. "And the Terran have a way of making everything feel profound. I think we balance each other out." Zyra squeezed his hand gently, a contented smile spreading across her lips. "Perhaps that is why we work so well together." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a soft chime from the communication console inside the house. Zyra's expression grew serious as she rose to answer it, Dren following close behind. The screen flickered to life, revealing a member of the Terran Council. "Citizen Zyra," the alien official said, their tone formal. "We have reviewed your petition to remain on Earth. After thorough deliberation, it has been granted." Dren felt a surge of relief, but the counselor wasn't finished. Finished. "Additionally, we have decided to extend the Interstellar Domestic Program to include joint cultural initiatives between Terran and humans. Your relationship with Dren has demonstrated the potential for meaningful partnerships between our species." Zyra bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, counselor. This means a great deal to us." The screen blinked off, leaving Dren and Zyra standing in the glow of the console. He turned to her, a grin spreading across his face. "So you're stuck with me now?" She laughed, the sound melodic and genuine. "It seems I am, but I wouldn't have it any other way." Their lives shifted into a new chapter after that. Together they worked with a newly established program to bridge the gap between their species. Their home became a meeting point for humans and Terran alike, a place where ideas were shared and friendships were forged. Dren marveled at how seamlessly their love had grown into something larger than themselves. It wasn't just about the two of them anymore. It was about showing both species what was possible when they looked beyond differences. Years later, on a quiet evening much like the one when Zyra first arrived, they sat together under the stars. The farm had flourished, a testament to their shared efforts. Dren's once solitary life was now vibrant and full, and he couldn't imagine it any other way. Zyra rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "Do you think they'll write stories about us?" He smiled, his arm wrapping around her. "Maybe. But the best stories are the ones we live, not the ones we read." She nodded, her eyes closing as she basked in the warmth of his presence. Then let's keep living it. Under the vast expanse of the universe, with the stars as their witnesses, Dren and Zyra's love stood as a beacon, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming differences, connection and understanding could prevail. And as they sat together, their hearts beating as one, they knew they had found not just love, but a home in each other.